Now that I've finished my demo plan, the next step in our project is to start adding some new walls into our floor plan. Up until this point, we've just been drawing with generic walls, which is just consisted of a thickness represented by two lines. And what we're going to do now is we're going to create a layered wall that's going to show us all of the components of that wall. So things like our wood stud layer and the chipboard on both sides. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a wall. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to say edit type. Now, I'm going to hit this button that says duplicate. And what this is going to do is this is going to make a copy of this wall because I've already drawn this generic 4-inch wall elsewhere in my model, and I don't want to change those. I want those to stay the same. So that's why I'm going to hit the duplicate button. And then we're going to name this to something that's going to describe the type of wall that we're doing. So I'm just going to say wood 2x4 with 1/2 inch chipboard. Now the important thing is I've named it, but what I haven't done is I haven't actually changed my wall. What I have to do is I have to come here to the structure and hit this button that says edit. And so you'll see right here that we have one layer in here that just says by category. So this is just a default material that Revit assigns to the wall, and you can see that it's 4 inches thick. We also have this function right here, and right now it's structure. So we're going to leave that because the wood stud is going to be our actual structure. The next thing is material. So I'm going to click right here. I'm going to click this gray box with the 3 dots. And that's going to bring up my materials property. And I'm just going to look to see if there's a wood stud material in here. Okay, so I've got some that are wood, but not like an actual wood stud. So I'm going to create a new material just for my wood studs. So I'm going to come down here to this little sphere with the plus button. I'm going to right click this and say create new material. You'll see right here it says default new material. So I'm just going to come in here. I'm going to rename this. I'm going to call this my wood stud layer. I'm not going to put a thickness in here because I can actually use this material for other stud walls as well. So whether it's a 2x4 or 2x6, I'm going to use this same material. The next thing we're going to look at is over here in the graphics tab. Here is where we tell Revit what kind of graphics we want to apply when we see that material in our plans. There's 2 types of things. There's shading, which you predominantly see in your 3D view. You have surface patterns and you have cut patterns. So cut patterns is what you're going to see when you're cutting through a material. A surface pattern is what you're going to see when you look at the material in elevation. So what I like to do for my wood stud layer is I like to assign it a background pattern that's just a solid fill, and then I'm going to do just this light gray. And I'm going to click OK. Now the next thing is a 2x4 is not actually 4 inches wide, it's actually 3.5 inches. So I'm going to switch this to 3.5 inches. And then the next thing I do is I need to add my chipboard. And you'll see right here, we have these 2 things called core boundaries. And so typically I just leave my wood stud layer in that core boundary, and then I put everything else on the outside of the core boundary. So I'm just use this up button, and that's going to move that above. Now our function is the chipboard is not the actual structure. It is, we're going to list it as this finish 1, but we have some options here. Substrate would be like your exterior sheathing. Thermal/air layer would be if you're going to do an air gap or some rigid insulation. And then I do my first layer finishes as finish 1 and my second layer is finish 2. That would be if I were to have tile or something, that would be a finish 2. And then there's also a layer for a membrane layer, and that would be like a house wrap or weather barrier that you would put on the outside of an exterior wall. And what this function does is this just has to deal with how Revit decides to join the walls, and we'll look at that more in the future. But for now, I'm just going to say finish 1. And then I'm going to search to see if I have a gypsum wallboard material, and I do. So I'm going to click this one. But before I hit OK, I'm going to come over here to graphics. I'm going to scroll down. And you'll see that there's a cut pattern assigned to this that's the sand pattern. I kind of find this distracting, and you can't really see it when you have your thick lines on. So I'm just going to come in here. I'm going to change this just to say none, because I think it's distracting and it's not really doing anything. So I'm going to hit OK. Now in residential, the jet board is going to be 1/2 inch thick. And the important thing is I need it on both sides of the wall. So I'm going to hit this insert again. But now you'll see that we have one on the top side. So I'm just going to move this down so that it's at the bottom side of the wall. The top side is the exterior side of the wall. The bottom side is the interior side of the wall. Since the jet board is on both sides, it doesn't really matter in this case because it's symmetrical. But if I were designing a wall that I was going to use as the exterior wall, I would put my brick and my sheathing on the top of this and the jet board at the bottom, just so that, and this would correlate to when you draw the wall, what Revit recognizes as the exterior side of the wall and the interior side of the wall. So I'm going to change this to finish one. And then again, this is going to be a 1/2 inch. I'm going to click OK and then OK again. And then in order to see this, I have to make sure that my view is set to, the detail level right now is set to coarse. I'm going to switch this to fine, and you'll see that when I did that, I now have distinct layers in this wall type. So it's still just one wall, but I have a layer that represents my jet board, a layer that represents my stud, and then another layer that represents my jet board. Now I'm going to create an exterior wall real quick. So I'm going to hit edit type. We're going to duplicate this. So this one is going to be a 2x6 wall. We're going to do brick on the exterior. So I'm going to come to edit. Now I can already keep this gypsum because it's the same. My wood stud layer, I'm just going to bump this up to 2x6, which is 5.5 inches wide. And then I just need to change this one to match. So I'm just do a substrate. This is where I'm going to put my plywood sheathing. And then I'm just going to assign the plywood pattern to the cut pattern. And then I'm going to add a little bit of an air gap. So I should have a material in here that's just called air. And I'll just assign that as 1 inch. And then lastly, my finish, I'm just going to find a brick. And you'll see right here in my foreground pattern, there's a brick pattern that's going to actually make my exterior elevation look like brick. And then the cut pattern is the diagonal line to show up in my wall type. So, and then I'm going to change that to 3 inches. Now again, notice how all of this is on the exterior side and then my jet board is on the interior side. So I'm going to hit OK and then OK again, and that will change it to my exterior wall. So you can see I have a layer for my brick, my air gap, my sheathing, my stud layer, and my layer of gypsum board. So this is why I like to have my stud layer to have a gray, just because it makes it a little easier to see the actual stud layer instead of having a whole bunch of white space in these wall types. And now when I come to draw this wall, if we pay attention to what the location line is, so if Right now I'm on finished face exterior. So as I draw my location line, let me switch to that wall type. You'll see that it draws it on the exterior. And again, if I draw the wall, if I say wall center line, I'm actually just going to draw a line just to kind of see how you can see how the different location lines get affected. So when I drew this one along this line, you can see that it put the exterior along that line, and then the rest of the wall went to the bottom side. If I change this, so if I go finish face interior and draw the same line, you'll notice that it puts the wall on the top side of that line. And then if I draw a wall center line, puts that wall in the center. And this is where the core boundary comes into effect, is when I draw with core center line, what that's going to do is this is going to put the 2x6 right in the middle of that. And then as I look at these blue arrows, so this will always flip it along the location line. So when I do the wall center line and I flip it, it's going to flip it basically symmetrically. But with the core, since that goes right down my middle, you'll see that what's going to do is it's going to mirror this wall along the 2x6 rather than the actual center of the wall, because the center of this wall isn't the center of the 2x6. And so depending on how you want to draw, the wall location line is what really determines where the location of that wall is. The last thing that I want to go over is when you're drawing walls like this, is that Revit will pay attention to the way that you're drawing. So generally your brick's going to be on the outside. So if I start drawing counterclockwise, it's going to put my brick on the outside. If I draw counterclockwise, it's going to put the brick on the inside. So just pay attention to how you're drawing your walls. And of course, if you draw it wrong, you can always come back later and flip those around. But you'll notice that this box got bigger, and that's because of how our location line was drawn. When we flipped it, it grew a little bit in one direction. And the other thing too is when you start to draw, if you notice that it's the wrong side, you can just hit your space bar, and that will also flip it so that it's the right side that you want it to be. So that's how you draw walls. And once we have our wall types created, we can start working on putting our floor plan together.